The Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee is proud to offer this herbicide resistance video featuring Dr. Erin Hill of Michigan State University.
So during this season, if you're looking at your field after a post-application and you're wondering if you have resistance, there are a few things to consider. According to the Weed Science Society of America, 9 out of 10 issues with escaped weeds are not related to herbicide resistance. They're related to other issues during the application, such as the weather, issues with the application equipment, or perhaps even the stage of the weed at the time of application. So when you're out looking at your field and you're scouting after your application, some things to look for are what species that you have out there that seem to be surviving. Is it that they were already there and they are kind of dinged up but still surviving, or are they newly emerging weeds that weren't necessarily there when you made the application in the first place? If there are multiple species that seem to be escaping your post control, then you may want to consider some of those other factors. Resistance can show up in a few different ways. It can look like maybe half of the population died and the other half of the population didn't. It can look like a small spot that seems to be spreading in the field. So it can look like different things, but basically you're going to see plants that, though they may be slightly injured, are continuing to grow and will continue to reproduce. Another thing to think about when you're looking at the field and scouting after an application is what species are there that seem to have escaped. Now we know in Michigan that we already have glyphosate resistance to some of the pigweeds, palmer amaranth and water hemp, and we have glyphosate resistance in common ragweed. And mare's tail for sure. So if those are some of the species that you're seeing after a Roundup application, then yes, you definitely need to consider resistance. And we've also seen multiple resistance in those species. If it's something like velvet leaf or common lamb's quarters, we're not saying that it's absolutely not resistant, but you need to consider some of the other issues. Some other things to consider in addition to using different herbicide chemistries to combat resistance are some non-herbicide options, such as the use of cover crops, such as bringing back cultivation into your operation. And there's also the opportunity to adjust some of your cultural practices, such as your planting population or altering your row spacing. So if you suspect that you're having a resistance issue, you can send seeds into diagnostic services, and we are fortunate that the Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee has supplemented the cost of running those screens for growers with soybeans in the rotation. Of interest to soybean growers are mare's tail, or also known as horseweed. That one is a species that usually comprises more than 50% of the samples that come in. And many of those turn out to be glyphosate resistant, as is suspected by the people submitting them. But with our screens that test against multiple modes of action, we're also able to identify if they're multiple resistant. So many of our mare's tail populations are resistant to both glyphosate and the ALS inhibiting herbicides. And when you get your report back, it shows you what the weeds were resistant to, but it also shows you what products worked on the weeds. The other species that are probably of biggest interest are the pigweed species, such as water hemp and palmer amaranth. Not as widespread as the mare's tail, and here we're really looking again at multiple resistance to glyphosate and ALS is what we typically see. And in this past season we did have spread to a couple more counties in southeast Michigan. The others are the ragweeds, both common and giant ragweed. Last year was the first year that we screened for and found glyphosate resistance in giant ragweed in the state, and that was over in Macomb County. This past season it had also popped up in southeast Michigan, and so that is a weed to be on the lookout for, is glyphosate resistant giant ragweed. Common ragweed is probably one that more people across the state are familiar with, and it's only been the past few seasons that we have seen glyphosate resistance, which is what we have here. We've also seen some PPO resistance come up in certain counties, and we're looking at a new incidence of resistance to clopyralid in Christmas trees. So if you'd like to find out more about the herbicide resistant weeds in your county, we have a clickable map on the Diagnostic Services website, which is pestid.msu.edu. There you can click on your county and find out what weeds are resistant to what herbicides and when that resistance was identified.
Be sure to hit the subscribe button to see more soybean production videos, and check out the links in the description box below for more information on how to submit weed seed samples.